Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Lunch and Learn, which is brought to you by family partners of Morris and Sussex counties. This is your host, Patricia Houston, and I'm here with our special guest, David Johnston. Welcome, David.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I just want to remind everybody that this Lunch and Learn is brought to you by family partners of Morris and Sussex counties. And we are very happy to have David here with us. And today, the first thing, David, because I know that you have a lot of experience in the field. So I would like you to talk about a little bit more about yourself.
Sure. Again, thank you for the invitation. I appreciate the opportunity. My experience is all really in child welfare in different facets of it. For 30 through 30, I think 32 years, something like that, I was with DCP&P, formerly the Division of Youth and Family Services, in their Morris office, and then expanding into Sussex. And then I guess my last 5 years or so doing some work and backup in Passaic County. So that's been most of my experience is with the Child Welfare Agency. During that time, I also became adjunct faculty, and I remain there today in the Robert D. McCormick Child Advocacy Center and the Department of Social Work at Montclair State University. Now, teaching courses in child maltreatment, in substance use and family crisis and social issues and adolescent policy and working with adolescents. So those kind of things have sort of been, a nice fit. Lately, since I retired in 2018, I've been doing some contract work for a couple nonprofits in Hudson County, most recently working on one of their opioid prevention grants and taking a look at how that particular substance has impacted families, adolescents in particular. So that's my background.
Thank you very much for that information. So today we're going to talk about Deirdre's house. Would you please, David, elaborate in regard to Deirdre's house?
Sure. So Deirdre's house is Morris County's Child Advocacy Center. Deirdre's house opened in 1994, and it's named after Deirdre O'Brien, who was abducted, assaulted, and murdered in 1982 in Morris County. Her family has been involved as the founders and, at the ground level, setting up Deirdre's house. Deirdre's house, like many other child advocacy centers in the state, is under the larger umbrella of the New Jersey Children's Alliance. We're an accredited center, and that means kind of meeting both federal and state guidelines to maintain our accreditation as a child advocacy center.
Services exactly Deirdre's house provides.
Now,
can you hear me now?
That's perfect. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you. So, David, what type of services does Deirdre's house provide?
There's a number of them, but our core service at this point is clinical counseling for victims of child maltreatment. And some of them do come through DCP&P, are referred that way. Others come from different referral sources, but we have 4 clinicians. They are bilingual in Spanish and English. And we work with children up to the age of 21, providing these services for really as long as they need it. There's other support services that we have through different kinds of grants. We have financial assistance programs such as Shine, a day education camp called Dear Camp. We have something called the Healing Fund that enables us to provide some stopgap, sometimes one-time only supports for families that might help them with utilities and kind of get back on their feet. All of those things are all provided through grant money that we are able to raise privately. We are a separate, freestanding nonprofit agency. We are part of the multidisciplinary team in Morris County, and we provide a lot of other community education and prevention programs, including the Game of Life.
Awesome. And would you please explain to us what exactly a multidisciplinary approach is?
So I'm looking at our audience today, and so I may be speaking to the choir to a large extent for Lenora and Susan in talking about it. Well, the multidisciplinary team approach is just that. It's how it sounds. There's multiple disciplines involved when you are investigating or assessing and providing services for families and children who've experienced abuse and neglect. And those disciplines are child protection, mental health, child behavioral health, medical, law enforcement, whether that be local law enforcement or county prosecutors' offices. I think, and other kind of professional support agencies. Now, certainly, I see Susan here. Certainly, CASA is one of them. The CASA isn't typically in Morris County a ongoing member, as far as I'm aware, of the MDT process. But that's basically it. The idea is so families don't need to, particularly children, be interviewed over and over again. So you have the multiple disciplines involved at almost the get-go. We're not quite yet in Morris County. Typically, they're all housed in one place.
Especially Deirdre's house, there are different services you guys provide. Would you please break down what type of services, or let's say what type of support family can expect from Deirdre's house?
So I guess when I'm using the word support with regard to Child Advocacy Center, it's broad. Some of it, families may not initially view as supportive, in that if they're coming through the Advocacy Center as a result of an investigation or assessment involving those different disciplines that we just talked about, there's forensic interviews that are held there. It's a child-friendly, family-friendly format or environment versus it being done in a police department. Throughout the process, though, we do have advocates, and they're in the chat. You can see our bilingual English-Spanish advocates, Osairys and Jissell, are meeting with the families at the time that they're first introduced to the center and this whole process. And if they take advantage of the center services, including the clinical services, they're always meeting with the families on an ongoing basis to make sure that the center has, a real good idea about what the family's needs are and that we're able to meet them, whether it's directly or by connecting them to different kinds of supports. So there's the clinical counseling program that we talked about, the different grants, the day camp. We are part of the Morris County Child Abuse Prevention Collaboration, which today sort of has morphed into our education partnership, working with child behavioral health and the schools. But we work with, and serve, Morris County victims. I think basically on an annual basis, we're having over 1,700 visits at the center. So for such a small center, that's a lot of use coming out of that. And that is really open 24/7 all year long for these interviews. They can take place at any time.
Okay, thank you very much for that information. David, let's talk about child maltreatment.
Mm-hmm. One of the questions that we were talking about earlier, like the definition of child maltreatment. So again, knowing the audience, but hopefully, since this is recorded, more folks are going to be able to see that. Mm-hmm. But it's a legal definition, certainly. And when you're looking at child maltreatment, certainly in New Jersey, but typically nationwide, you're always looking at it as defined by behaviors or actions or acts of commission, someone doing something, which would be abuse for the most part, or acts of omission, falls under the category of neglect, where parents, guardians, or caretakers, those adults responsible for the care of children, are either doing something or not doing something that they should be to keep those children safe. So to look for the true definition of abuse and neglect, you do kind of need, you can go online. They're all public documents, and you can look up the statutes of Title IX and Title 30. So it's very helpful for families to kind of take a look at that and see how the system is defining abuse and neglect. And I know that's a very dry sort of explanation. And when the Child Protection Agency and law enforcement are involved, they're taking into consideration all of the nuances and the particulars of that situation involving that specific family or child, and whether or not those things mitigate the risk or safety that that child or those children might be at, and impact whether or not it might be considered abuse or neglect, if that makes any sense.
Of course, yeah, and thank you very much for the clarification, because that was very important information right there. In relation to, let's say, like if you suspect of child maltreatment, what to do?
Well, the way that the law is written in New Jersey, it's pretty broad, and for a reason. It says any person having reasonable concern to believe a child is being abused or neglected, has been abused or neglected, or may be abused and neglected, must report. New Jersey is a mandated reporter state. That means everyone has the same responsibility. It's not just like other states, their hotlines might only accept calls from professionals, such as teachers or doctors or other folks that are involved with the family. In New Jersey, everyone is responsible. And at the top of the chat box is the hotline where people can call and make that call and make that report if they have that reasonable concern.
That's great that you're clarifying that not only providers can report, but also everyone. That's great that you provide that information. Thank you. So I know that you say the contact information in there. So when they call, what to expect from that phone call?
So I'm not quite sure. We're at least in New Jersey at the 10-year mark, probably closer to 15, where we have a hotline,
okay,
a centralized hotline. So they should expect to have some questions put to them when they call. You can call anonymously. Absolutely, you can call anonymously in New Jersey, but they are going to ask you for your name, and they may ask you if you want it to be kept confidential. It helps in case there's other calls that come in that the agency, if it's assigned to the agency, can call that caller back and clarify different things with them. So they should expect to be given ask for some identifying information for themselves, how they're related to that particular child, how they came to have this this particular information, if they saw any injuries, do they think that there are other people that might have that kind of information? But that's, as I understand it from the hotline, that's what they should expect at this point.
Well, this is good because it's important for families to know that they don't have to be scared, and you just clarify that, that's important. All right, thank you very much. How to prevent child maltreatment?
How do you prevent child? Well, I guess I want to know from what perspective. I guess so. If I'm looking at it, if I'm a parent and I'm saying, let's not even look at maltreatment, right? Let's look at, I don't know. Let's look at a sport or a hobby that their child might be interested in, or let's look at a subject, right? Math or English, history, whatever it is. If you're wanting to help your child be better at something or enjoy, get more enjoyment out of something, you as a parent make yourself available to different trainings, presentations, maybe, right? Like such as these, so you can be more informed and you can help your child learn more, get more proficient at something. So if you use that analogy and you're looking at prevention of child maltreatment, I guess from the parent perspective, I would want to know as much as I can as a parent to be able to respond to any number of things that our kids will and do on a daily basis, right? Throw at us. All right, so what's the best way that I could react to that child that's, that's most beneficial to their development, to our relationship, things like that. So that's sort of, from the parent perspective, in a really small way, that's a way to prevent abuse or neglect. I think from a larger perspective, like from the family, beyond the family and the community perspective, or even like the macro perspective, when you're talking about government, right, and legislation, prevention is offering services to the general population, right? That's primary prevention. But then I think you could also look at it in terms of what they're calling secondary prevention. So you're looking at particular populations or demographics where abuse and neglect might be more likely to happen. So you target your efforts at that population. And then the last one is when you break down prevention, is like that tertiary level. So neglect may have already have happened. So you're targeting your efforts in how to prevent it from happening again, if that makes any sense.
Yes, of course, of course. And this is so important. And this is the reason today we also want to talk about ACEs. So
Sure.
what exactly is ACEs?
ACEs, it's an acronym standing for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And it's gotten a lot of press, I'd say, in the last 5 to 10 years. And what you should know is it's over a 20-year-old survey. It is significant in many ways. And it makes sense. So I would encourage families to go on to just Google ACEs, and you'll see the survey, and it's got a checklist. So it's really easy to use. And what it's saying is the more ACEs one has, particularly as a child, right? It's going to expose you to more problems as you move, as you grow older. And those problems may be emotional, behavioral, they may be physical, or result in some kind of need for medical attention. And those are related to child abuse and neglect. And let me just, my other screen just died where I have the example up here. So the score, here we go. The ACE score is really looking at that cumulative exposure, right, to those adverse conditions. But it goes on to say that exposure to any single ACE condition is counted as sort of 1 point. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to take you down the road to needing all of these other services, but it's something to keep an eye on, right? And let me see, there's one other thing I wanted to say about ACEs. So there are 9 different ones, and you can go and you can take a look at that, right? There's the verbal abuse, certainly sexual, physical abuse, emotional neglect, physical neglect, mental illness, domestic violence, being exposed to domestic violence, parental incarceration, all of those kinds of things, parental substance use, really are considered ACEs. And depending on when those ACEs occur, if they occur early on in those really significantly developmental years, like age birth to 3, right? Even if you have fewer ACEs, the impact can be even greater.
David, now that we're talking about ACEs, it is an acronym. Would you please explain what ACEs stand for, so like that families can understand?
Sure.
Thank you.
Adverse childhood experiences.
Thank you very much, because that's important for families to know. Exactly.
Yeah, we talk in acronyms very often.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about resiliency.
So when you're thinking about resiliency, I mean, the easiest way to explain what resilience is I think just really the ability to bounce back, right? So when you're looking at it through maybe the lens of an ACE, an adverse childhood experience, what's that child ability to bounce back, and how do they bounce back? Sometimes it's an inner sort of resilience, and sometimes it's external. It could be related to more protective factors that are in their environment, right? Maybe extended family, maybe a teacher, maybe a coach, maybe a casa, are folks that can be protective factors and help that child bounce back, because children do bounce back. And I think we need to remember that that children are resilient, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to minimize the amount of things that we're expecting them to bounce back from, if that makes any sense. There's one book that I really like, and I encourage students to read all the time, and it's called On Playing a Poor Hand Well. It's by Dr. Mark Katz. And he takes a look at what he's calling, I'm going to forget one of them, I always do, the 3 Ps, and how that's connected to resilience and a child's ability to bounce back. And that's, whether or not the child thinks that what happened to them is very personal, it's only happening to them, or it's very pervasive. It happens in all of their domains. It happens at home, it happens at school, it happens in their extracurriculars, all of those kinds of things. So he looks at it that way, and it's a good way for clinicians then to kind of figure out, well, if these kids are perceiving what happened to them this way, it gives them a little bit a clearer roadmap, I think, on how to intervene at a clinical level, but certainly on, as another support person, whether it be someone from the FSO or other involved entities, they can take a look at those 3 Ps and kind of have an idea of where to start in their support for that child.
Great. That's great. And David, I would like you to please talk about related interventions. Because basically, we know there are services and resources available. We want to make sure families understand, what type of approach providers are taking to help families.
I guess related interventions to families that are going through a child maltreatment investigation.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Certainly, if they're involved with the Child Protection Agency, that agency can link them up with, and that would be, maybe contracted agencies through that agency, or if that agency isn't going to stay involved, they can link them in the community. And oftentimes, and Deirdre's House does it as well, if we're not going to be providing services to that particular family, but we know that they still need something, we may be linking. I just did it an hour before I came on here, and we were talking about an LGBTQ youth, and that youth just recently sharing or coming out to their parent or their guardian, and the parent was calling us as to, I have no idea, what should I be saying? I don't want to create another adverse childhood experience, right, by not being supportive. So we link them to some groups in Morris County, in particular New Jersey Edge, which is located in Denville. But then there's also PFLAG, and they provide support groups to parents and to children throughout New Jersey and nationally. So we would look to specifically, what are those families needing? Is it something that's real concrete? Like they need housing, they need food, those kinds of things, employment, they need utility help. We can link to those different things. But if it's more related to emotional or behavioral needs, we can do that as well. Morris County's got a really good, I think, tight resource network. And we do frequently use the Morris Sussex Resource Net. Okay. Basically, it's a resource manual that the CMO maintains. So that's very helpful for families to go into and use, and it's always updated.
I want to go back a little to Deirdre's House. Are those services free, or would you please explain that?
That's a good question. All the services are free. We have some grants that we get through the county and through the state, but the majority of our funding is private. So if during an intake with a family, we find that they're involved with a case management entity such as DCP&P or the CMO, or prior to that, youth case management, it's likely that we would, with that family's permission, speak with that agency to see if that agency plans to continue working with the family. And if they do, then it's not likely that we would be providing services. We are the sort of a catch-all that when other agencies are backing away from a family and the family still has needs, but they may not have insurance or the ability to afford clinical counseling or some other supports, that we can provide that for free.
Okay, that's good to clarify that for sure. Thank you, David. And the last thing we have in here is, because we want to make sure families know who to contact. So would you please go over contact information and all of that, please?
Absolutely. So in the chat, and I know that'll be put in, you'll adapt that to the recording. My contact information is in there, my email. Our bilingual advocates, Osairys, Billini, and Jissell Varella. They are full-time. You can reach them at that same number, and their emails are the same thing. It's Osairys@DOB or Jissell@DOB. I'm a contracted per diem person, so I'm physically at the center on Thursdays, but I check my email all the time. So right now we're working with two Game of Life events that we're planning at two different high schools in the spring. So it's a sort of an all week, all hands on deck kind of a thing to make that happen. But that's the best way to reach out to us.
Thank you very much. And I also want to remind everybody that the contact information, I'm gonna link all the contact information below the video. So if any provider or anyone wants to share the video, all the contact information is gonna be there. So David, I know we just finished it, but I want to say thank you very much for taking the time and being with us in here, sharing all the information. I know a lot of families are going to benefit. Thank you to the participants that are joining this meeting, and thank you everyone. I'm going to start the recorder right now.